Welcome everyone to our AMG talk today on team building and management in post-pandemic era with Dr. Gerrie Zvara. Dr. Gerrie Zvara is a UCLA alum, and she currently is the assistant director. Is that right, Gerrie? Or associate director?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. For organizational and development here at UCLA. And I will go ahead and hand it over to her. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I'm just going to adjust my screen here so I can screen share. Well, 1 second. Can you all see my screen? All right.
Yes.
Okay. So again, hello everyone, and thank you, Grace, for the introduction. I am Gerrie Zvara. I'm with UCLA Administration with Organizational Development and Effectiveness, and I'm excited to be here today. And thank you all for joining. Our topic today is a biggie. I was just telling Grace that before everyone came in. And it's really one that can be discussed to no end. But we only have an hour, so I've tried to condense it as much as possible to the fundamentals to at least give us a place to start. So the pandemic really, I think, shook our status quo, right? With elements that are both advantageous and disadvantageous, depending on how you want to accept them. But in either case, it's really had an impact on how we manage our teams. So on the positive side, flex work, which is the flexible work schedules, emphasize the importance of focusing on work-life balance and expanded our perspective of the employee as a whole person and not just as a worker. So it demonstrated that work can, be done productively no matter where you perform it, as long as you are equipped with the essential tools. It also introduced us to new ways of communicating. Even if it's not your particular preference, you are now more skilled in using Zoom or Slack or Teams, and you may even have a new appreciation for seeing yourself on camera. So on the flip side, that shift happened very quickly, and we had to manage the learning curves. Our team members were no longer in close proximity. The interactions lessened and possibly weakened, some of the connections. So the question for us is, how do we leverage the pros and how do we reimagine the cons to continue managing high-performing collaborative teams? Okay, so I'm going to preface our discussion with this personal thought. The fundamentals of managing teams did not change from pre-pandemic, right? It stayed the same during the pandemic, and it's still the same as we enter this post-pandemic era. We still have to provide clear expectations. We still have to manage performance. We still have to recognize achievements, and we still need to support growth and development. And these are just the big buckets. And I think it's important to establish this at the very beginning so that we understand that what we need to effectively manage in this new norm is really the ability and most importantly, the willingness to adjust our approaches to achieving these actions and also stretch ourselves and our teams beyond, what's within reach or what we're used to doing. So if we're not willing to do any of that, then, we may experience some challenges ahead of us. So having said that, I'd like to, kind of get your, some of your ideas or some of your experiences and invite you to use the chat feature and share one approach to management that you've adjusted, shifted, and maybe, altogether changed to be more effective in managing our team today. So go ahead and maybe share some ideas on chat. Yes, Zoom chat office hours. Yeah. Hi, Maureen.
Hey, Gerrie, it's great to see you.
Flexible schedules. Yes. So glad to kind of see ideas here that we're actually going to be talking about, because I think these are all important. Communication using phone, text, in addition to the Teams and the Slack. Yeah, so now we're really using different avenues, right, to have these conversations. So this is great. So what we're going to do today, and I'm going to move us on, I'm going to use these fundamentals that I just mentioned as our guide to our discussion. And I think what we'll all find is that for the most part, the adjustments are small, but can still be effective in this hybrid world, right? A couple of keywords that you'll hear me mention are balance and intentionality. And I think that creating balance and being intentional in the way we manage will help us navigate through these changes. So let's start with the big one, right? Expectations. So developing and communicating clear expectations is at the core of effective management. So hopefully we've all been setting and communicating expectations pre-pandemic. If not, it may be time for us to consider doing so, because the new norm has added layers to managing that necessitate clear expectations. It's highly possible that the way we did things changed during the pandemic, and it's equally possible that we're not going to return to those ways. So, as some of you mentioned, right, the introduction of flex work changed our team interactions. We may have lost that immediate access to information because the team member is no longer in the next office and we can't just drop by and chat about a project. We may not be able to read nonverbal behaviors to see how engaged an individual is in the conversation because they have their videos turned off, in a virtual or hybrid meeting. We may not be able to do a quick check-in on how a project is progressing because a team member is not available. So those are really important, connections to have and interactions to have. And in order to ensure that these productive connections are maintained in our dispersed environment, it's important to set and communicate new expectations that will guide our work performance and our team interactions, right? So everyone needs to be clear on what work needs to get done, setting performance goals or performance objectives. And it needs to be clear, who's accountable, right? By whom, who's going to do the work, and when work needs to be completed, right? Setting those deadlines. These expectations need to be set, but also agreed upon between you and your team members to minimize, one, confusion, and two, to potentially, avoid tension among the team members. I saw people talking about work schedules. So let's use that as an example. Organizations are implementing flex work in different ways. It can range from very loose, so team members can choose when, and even if they even need to come into the office, to something middle ground. The organization determines the number of days in the office and the number of days remote, but the team member can choose which days to designate as in office and remote. And then something a little stricter, where the organization determines, when people will be in the office and when people will be remote. So the best practice is to find that balance, right, that will meet the organizational needs and provide the team member with some control over the situation. And we want to remember that in a change situation, removal of control tends to trigger resistance. And so having input into the matter alleviates, those tensions and allows for the change to kind of integrate more smoothly. So whatever that balance is for your work environment is the expectations that you will need to set and agree on with your team members. Similarly, expectations related to team interactions should also be clearly communicated and strongly encouraged, not only for the purposes of completing work, but also to increase the amount of socialization that they have with each other, right? So the virtual options won't replace the office drop-bys or the hallway chats, but it is going to provide opportunities to create those missed connections. And these connections don't all have to be just work-related actions. Managers should intentionally create opportunities for team building activities, even if it's just short icebreakers at the beginning of each meeting, right? Managers need to model these behaviors so that team members see that they are acceptable and hopefully mimic, right? When you just talk the talk and not walk the walk, then it's harder to integrate the change. So fortunately for us, there are a variety of tools available to achieve effective and efficient interactions. And as a team, you can agree on what's the most useful tool, for the purpose of that interaction, right? So we don't always have to use Zoom. If it's a quick meeting or just an update, can you use, Slack or Teams, or even agree on, I think I saw somebody say texting each other, or, email is still there, right? Email is not lost in this new environment. So there are different avenues to use. Additionally, with regards to team interactions, it's also necessary to discuss appropriate times to interact, considering that there are individual differences at play, right? I, may have a personal appointment during business hours, and so I'm going to make up those hours maybe after hours and work on some things. But, is it appropriate for me to then, email my coworkers or whoever I'm working with, or even my boss, after hours? And how are they going to feel when they receive that email? So we need to kind of think about that and agree on what those expectations are that are relevant to the work getting done, and using proactive communication to ensure that scheduling conflicts or any misalignments with schedules are not the rationale for incomplete work or unmet deadlines, right? Because it's, like I said, it's possible for a team member to request for information during the business hours to make maybe a decision in a project, but the other team member responds, after hours. How, what's the effect on the interaction in that, and what's the effect on, the work, right? So, if expectations are not set on how to collaborate, then it could lead to ineffective collaborations, and then also maybe low willingness to actually interact. We are also seeing some reported instances of burnout, especially among employees who work remotely. And that's because the lines between work and personal time are getting blurred. As managers, it's important to model behaviors supporting work-life balance, and with the team, maybe establish some boundaries and abide by them, right? I just kind of said that example that, sending, emails out after business hours. And, if you have to, and I plead guilty on having done that in, a couple of instances, but if you have to send it, after hours, then you need to be clear, that a response is not expected right then and there, right? Unless for some reason you have that agreement with the individual that it's okay to correspond after hours. So these are new layers that we really have to think about now, and you'll be more effective in managing your teams if these expectations are clearly communicated rather than left ambiguous. So one other thing, with regards to expectations, we develop and we know, how, what expectations need to be communicated, but then we also have to think how we're going to communicate them. So you may have to use a combination of methodologies. So you can kind of see, are you going to do this in person? Are you going to do this virtually? Are you going to provide some written documentation of what the expectations are? Or are you going to do a combination of any of those? Are you going to have this discussion on a one-to-one basis? Or, are there particular expectations that you want to discuss, as a whole team, because you want everyone to hear the message all at the same time and, and hopefully receive the message in exactly the way you intended it to be. So those are also some other things that you need to think about with regards to communicating the expectations. And if you have any questions, please feel free to, put it in the chat, and Grace is helping me monitor that, and we'll try to respond to as many of them after a discussion. Okay, so having clear expectations will definitely help manage performance, right? However, if your performance management approach relies on, observation of a team member physically working in their workspace or monitoring when they are doing work, then it may become problematic in a hybrid environment, right? If observation, like physical observation, is a metric that's going to be used for managing performance, then we're putting our team members who are working remotely, partly or fully, at a disadvantage because they're not always going to be, in the office. So, so let me just pause for a minute and ask you, and again, please use the chat feature. How would you change your approach to performance management to make it more effective in our new work environment? I knew you were going to say that, Gina. So regular check-ins for support, absolutely. Yes, outcome and objective focus. Yes, those are all important, and it's actually very much in line with how performance management actually really need to be, right? So time spent on work is not the best metric for evaluating performance. I wouldn't suggest that to be a metric that you use. Setting goals, like many of you said, or task orientation, and achieving results are much better metrics. And by defining and agreeing on performance goals, which you guys see on the graphic there, is the first step, right, in effective performance management process. If we define and agree on those performance goals, we are actually setting up our team members for success, no matter what their work schedule status is. But especially for those who are fully remote and don't have as much face-to-face interactions, or could potentially feel disconnected to their managers and other team members in the work that they are doing together, having clear goals is going to be very important in their overall performance success, right? So let's look at this performance management graphic. So my first recommendation, and I bolded it, and it's the number one thing on this step one of the process, is do not skip this step. Pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, post-pandemic, right? This step one in the performance management process or cycle is the most important thing, right? So do not skip that step. set clear goals. And many of you have probably heard of the SMART technique, right? So clear goals will be helpful or effective if it's specific, if it's measurable, if it's attainable, if it's relevant, and if it's time bound, right? So specific means you are able to provide the detail and the expectation of what that goal is going to be. And it's measurable. So you know exactly when you've achieved it and what, when you're successful in it. It's attainable. That means you can actually do it within the time frame that you've agreed on. That it's relevant, whether it's tied to departmental goals or a bigger organizational goal, and that it's time bound. There definitely should be a deadline for that goal being met, right? So that is the SMART technique. And number 3, as I said, with relevance, right? Align these goals to the organizational objectives or initiatives so that the individual can see that the work that they are performing is helping a bigger cause or the bigger organizational, the bigger picture, right, of the organization. So those are really important things to talk about when you are developing your performance goals. So the next step is the check-in. And like number 1, this is also very, very important because really the check-in is what's happening between the first month. Like if for my group, we do a fiscal year performance cycle. So in July, we have the step 1 discussion. And then, and obviously in June is when we have the performance review. So you have 10 months of check-ins that you could utilize, right? So decide how often you're going to check in. In this graphic, it says check in at least quarterly. You decide what's going to be the best for your group. Decide when and what mode, right? In person or virtual, and then schedule them in advance so that everyone can get prepared for when those check-ins happen. In instances, now we kind of have to think about this. I mean, when we were back in the office, well, everyone's back in the office, we would hopefully have these check-ins, you schedule it, you're in a meeting room, you have no disruptions, no interruptions. It's going to be the same thing in this hybrid world where you might be doing this virtually, right? You want to make sure that there are no disruptions. So for example, if you're having a virtual meeting and we've all experienced this, right? Somebody is, mowing their lawn or trimming their trees or whatever, trash pickup, whatever it may be. And there's a lot of background noise. You might want to make sure, you might want to reschedule that at a better time so that you're not disrupt, your discussion is not disrupted. And what you need to talk about is there's solid understanding of what's happening. And then obviously prepare in advance to discuss goal progression. As the manager, go into that meeting, knowing what questions to ask about, goal progression or support that you may be able to provide. And then also, obviously encourage your team member to go in there, being able to provide you with the specifics of the goal progression. Okay, so that's step number 2. And then step number 3, which should be the easiest, is when we actually do the performance review, right? And if you do 1 and if you do 2, then there'll be no surprises when you get to step 3, right? This is when you assess the goal progression, with respect to the timeline. This is when you recognize the progress or achievements, but also maybe get clarity on any unmet goals, right? Not that that would be a surprise for you, but something may have happened between the last check-in and your process review where a particular goal or activity of that goal wasn't met, right? So that, could potentially happen, but be able to get clarity on what that is, because that will then help you when you start this all over again. And then of course, offer support toward goal completion. As a manager, you want to set up your team members for success. So how can you support them in order to be able to perform at their best? So this is really the performance management cycle. And like I said, again, I'm going to repeat this. If you do 1 and if you do 2, 3 is not going to be stressful for any of us, right? Setting these performance goals and will make the check-ins meaningful and productive, and then your performance reviews will be less stressful. All right, so one of the third elements is recognition. Research and recognition practices support that in general, they are very important for boosting morale, for building trust, for enhancing communication. However, they also show that many organizations are lacking in their recognition practices, even those that operate with fully in-person teams. So what effect, could that possibly have in a hybrid environment where some team members are not consistently visible to managers? Obviously, easily people could be left unrecognized, and that can have a negative effect on morale, trust, and communication. And when team members start having those negative experiences, then that could lead to something bigger like turnover. And we know that, that has been, sort of a challenge for us lately. So we want to make sure that we minimize those type of experiences so that we don't increase our turnover. So let's do the kind of who, what, when, how for recognition. So who, right? You definitely want to recognize that, the individual and the achievements that they meet or are successful in. And you want to make sure that, again, balance, right? And the intentionality. You want to make sure that you are recognizing not just the people that you may see often, but also the people that you may not see often, right? And based on the work that they submit or the work that you see, make sure that you're very intentional, that you are recognizing everybody in your team in some shape or form, even though they're not necessarily around you on a daily basis, which is the easiest way to kind of really observe how, what a person is doing. But you also want to recognize the team, right? Team, it's very rare for a whole team to be recognized. But when you think about it, most of the work that we produce, is not done by one person. It's really done by, several people who are collaborating and coordinating their efforts. And so I think there should be more opportunities to recognize that team as a whole. And in our dispersed environment, this is even more important, because what this will do is it will help create, again, those connections and the trust, right, that we want for our teams to have. And then, so what are you going to recognize them for? Not just, obviously you're going to recognize them for their achievements, right? Or maybe steps in their achievements. Some goals are not a one-year goal. Some may be multi-year goals. So, recognize what they have achieved in order to progress towards that goal accomplishment. But I also want to encourage you to recognize the collaboration, the acts of collaboration, right? Like I said, work is not done by one person alone, and that collaboration needs to be recognized. And the more we recognize it, the more it becomes part of the norm. When are you going to do this? So you're going to do this ASAP. It's, any type of recognition should be done immediately, right? So I know in the workplace, it's easy for us to just kind of say, hey, Mary, good job, good job on that presentation, or good job on that project. And so what are you going to do for your team members that are not necessarily in the office all the time? What avenue are you going to use to recognize them? Will it be will it be a virtual meeting? Will it be, via email? Will it be, I don't know, maybe you might send them a package at home, whatever it is that you can do, in the office. You might want to see how does that translate to all of the remote employees or people that are not usually your team members that are not usually in the office all the time. And then how, Yes, I purposely left. If you guys are looking for the dollar signs, I purposely left the monetary rewards. That's, obviously something that we know that many people appreciate. But when we look at recognition and we look at boosting morale and motivating people, it's really that intrinsic recognition that's helpful, right? The thank yous and the nice work and, the glad that you're on the team, right? Those are things that really, I think, make people feel valued. The monetary rewards, obviously, they're nice to have. They help. We all want, some money, but they're not going to boost that morale or that motivation or that productivity on a long term, longer term, right? At some point, that's going to plateau and they're going to want more money. So that's not really the best motivator. And then, I was looking through like just some ways that people, can do that. And, we could recognize teams by, having a potluck for the team. Or like I said, if you're having a hybrid meeting, maybe you have the food in the conference room, but you also send maybe a Hub Grub, certificate to your virtual people, and then they can order food. And then they join the meeting virtually. So there are different ways that, you could, kind of reward them, for the recognition that you're giving them. A few other tips. I would really highly recommend promoting peer recognition to encourage collaboration. So we're used to, a manager recognizing the team members, but, team members, if they're collaborating in the project, should also have the opportunity to recognize each other. So that's one thing that we should promote more often. Make an effort to know team members' interests to align, with the type of recognition. This is really important. If any of you had any team members that joined during the pandemic, so they've always been virtual. Maybe you've never even met in person. How have you built that connection? What do you know about them? So again, going back to that intentionality, what do you need to do to make sure that those people, your hybrid or remote team members a little better, right? Also, know preferences for recognition. Do people appreciate more of a low-key kind of private recognition? Or, do you think that those departmental announcements will be more helpful for them, right? Some people really feel more appreciated when, others know about what, they've contributed. So know the preferences for recognition. And this last one is very important because, like I said, recognition practices are, not happening as often as we would like it to be. And some people use, budget as an excuse for that. And really, like what I just kind of put on the how, there's a lot of things that you can do to recognize people on a very small budget. So recognition can be done even at the smallest budget. So please don't let, not having a big budget stop you from recognizing your teams. Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about is professional development. And here's sort of a question that we want to think about is our development strategy for supporting a fully on-site team just as effective in a hybrid environment? And the answer to this is probably no, right? When we're in the office, right, or we're in our physical work environment, most professional development curricula are designed for those in-person training classes or training courses. So if you take those and just try to kind of, let's bring in all of our, let's have our remote employees just join us virtually. Sometimes, the interactions, or the learning process just doesn't translate well. So that's why we need to ask that question. And then we need to kind of think about, what can we do in order to, make that effective. So there's a couple of things that we can do for professional development, right? So when we're in the office, we're likely able to pick up ideas, right, on how to develop our career, whether it's through observations of other people who have been successful in their career advancements, or just some spontaneous discussions with managers or organizational leaders who can provide insight on the type of skills and competencies needed to excel in their role, or what future advancement, what skills and competencies are needed for future advancements. Employees who may not be present in the office all the time may miss out on those key connections. So as managers, if we're able to create like some type of like skill matrix or matrices, which basically outlines all the necessary skills to excel in a role or a project, and then share that with all our team members, then everyone has equal opportunity to assess their skills and develop, their career paths, right? So, here is sort of a guide, or like a job aid, right? Here is the skill, on how to be a project manager, right? And so they know, where they may need to, strengthen, their experience or skills, and, and also, maybe also highlight, here are the gaps, and this is what I need to then take classes on. And, corresponding to this, right, is having an individual development plan. So if we're able to provide, our employees with information on how to develop or what skills to develop, then they can then create an individual development plan, or together you can create an individual development plan with them and kind of carve or start structuring their career path. So again, when I was talking about reviewing available development programs and redesign or tailor them to support that hybrid environment, because many in-person training curricula do not translate effectively in a virtual setting. And then going back again to some intentionality, put some effort into increasing the visibility of remote team members. So, it's a lot easier to share someone's contribution or be able to recognize someone's contribution when, they're right next to you, right? And you see them on a daily basis. But, we have, again, the employees that we have that are remote, they don't have that. And there actually was a study, an HR study, that reported that 21% of their respondents said that remote work made their contributions less visible, and the lack of visibility negatively affected their career development. So going back to being intentional, managers and leaders need to make sure that those who spend less time in the office are getting that visibility, the necessary visibility to highlight their contribution to the organization. Include career development as a discussion item during one-to-one, right? So that intentionality goes, same thing goes for career development discussions, right? Make sure it's an agenda item in schedule one-to-ones, because that's probably one of those opportunities to actually interact with the remote team member. So if you make sure that it's fully, that it's integrated into that discussion, then that you're touching on it all the time, and it's being, you're almost like making sure that you have a temperature check on where they are with regards to their professional development. So the investment in professional development is not only beneficial for strengthening our talent pipeline, but it's also a great retention tool. So the more we're able to be diverse in how we offer our professional development programs and opportunities, the more attractive we become to potential employees. So I'd like to kind of share a resource. We've touched on all the 4 big buckets, and hopefully, like I said, you were able to see it as just adjustments to the approach, and no, not really like a 180 behavior change, right? And if we're able to kind of balance, right, the organizational needs and the individual needs, then I think we'll go a long way in how we build our team and how we manage them. But also, again, kind of being intentional in your actions and how you manage, and making sure that every group, right, whether you're fully in person, you're fully remote, or you're hybrid, that there is something for everyone, and you're not isolating anybody that's part of your team. So at UCLA Administration, we publish the monthly management tips, and hopefully some of you are already receiving this if you have subscribed to it. But it was originally designed when the pandemic began, and we wanted to make sure that our in our remote environment, that our management team or management staff is getting some support, right, and some resources that we could share with them to manage more effectively. And so we created this, and it actually, we've actually started sharing this, like actually pretty much immediately after we started producing them outside of administration. But the monthly management tips is housed in Vice Chancellor Michael Beck's webpage. So this is the webpage, and I'm just going to click on it really quickly. So hopefully it takes us there. And if you can see, there's tons. It's like it's in a newsletter format, and we have tons of different topics that we've touched on. So tips for ways to make the workplace more inclusive, goal setting, and professional development. So if you click on that, it'll give you the article. And some suggestions on how to go about developing or strengthening your professional development. And then there are some tools and some resources there. And then at the very end, on each of the newsletter or the news articles, at the end of each of them, there's a scenario for discussion. And so it's something for you to kind of think about. Here's a scenario. What would you do with it? And in the next month's newsletter, the response to the scenario will be included. So again, this is the website. It's in Administrative Vice Chancellor Michael Beck's webpage, and it's under staff resources, and it's the monthly management tips. But you have the link on the slide. So if you guys want to just take a picture of that, or you can email me, and I'll send that to you. I can email it to you. So hopefully you guys got some takeaways from what I shared. Like I said, many of these things are not new to you, because I'm seeing people's ideas and what they've implemented so far. And hopefully it's a lot of this is trial and error. If you're not used to doing any of the things that I discussed, just test it out and see if it works for you. No one is expecting you to, kind of make these changes overnight. There's a learning curve for all of us. And so, test it out, but, kind of come out of this with create balance and be more intentional in how you manage. And I think we'll all be just fine in this new work environment.
Thanks so much, Gerrie.
Thank you.
I actually do have a few questions that I've received for you. The first question is, what are some tips for managing up in order to get expectations clarified by your boss?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I think part of that is, one, be prepared. I think we don't like to ask those questions because we're scared to talk to our managers about it. But I think if you want to, if they haven't set expectations with you, and if you want to, I think the best approach is to sit down, schedule a meeting and sit down and say, I would like to make sure that I am doing the best I can to perform my job as well as I can. And it would be great to, get their feedback or their insight or their expectations as to, what the outcomes are or what the goals are, for you. Right. And I think you just need to kind of open that discussion and be prepared, to ask questions. It's one of those things where we're used to feedback coming from top down and not bottom up. And I think if we approach it in a manner that it's a learning tool for you, then I think it'll be okay to do that.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what are some tips for remote employees to feel more engaged with team members, especially if you started during the pandemic, so they've never met their teammates before, it seems like?
Yeah. I think like I said in one of the slides we talked about, I think it's good to kind of have some, whether it's a virtual happy hour or, even just a meeting, a get to know you meeting, right? And I think, just initiating that action or even maybe asking the help of the manager to, have sort of this, just a get to know you session is a good way to connect, right? Especially if you're new. And I think a lot of our team members will just be as open to doing that as possible. And it's also, if there is an opportunity, right, for team members who are remote to, come in person, what time, then maybe a manager can actually, schedule something that's in person and allow people to, have like a meet and greet. So there are different ways that you can do that. But, I think as a new person, if you were hired during the pandemic, I think there's nothing wrong with initiating that and just having sort of a Zoom happy hour or something like that.
Yeah, it can be nerve-wracking, but I think that's definitely like a good way to get to know your team members. The next question is, how can managers and supervisors be more mindful and support employees' well-being while recognizing the needs of the department for outputs and results?
Yeah, and that's where that balance comes in, right? And I think it's time management, and it's also, as a manager, know what the workload is, right? We are currently, many of us are functioning with low-level staffing, but the workload has remained the same. And, we see a lot of burnout, right? And so it's about managing that workload. And as a manager, it's about asking, what are all of these things in our pile, right? And should we be still doing all of these? Like, what changes happened during the pandemic that, some of these things that we used to do, are they still applicable? Or, are we stopping to check on those? Because if we're not, there may be a lot of things that we're still doing that's not really adding value. And if it's not adding value, then it may be time to kind of reassess some of those projects or some of those activities and, kind of manage that workload a little bit. So staff is not burnt out, is not feeling overwhelmed, but we're still meeting what the organization truly needs to produce, right? Or to achieve.
Right. The next question is, some departments don't believe in remote work. And how do you think this will be addressed moving forward? And, I think, as you mentioned earlier, like the pandemic has sort of changed our way of communicating and work and things like that. What do you think is going to happen in the future?
Well, the flex work or the flex work schedules, though, that is not going away. It is actually, if you look at all the research, they call it as being already integrated into the future of work. So the departments, I think, they need to make those types of decisions based on the decision needs, right? So are they just making people all come to work because that's the way they're used to doing it, right? Instead of really looking at their business needs. And I think if we continue on that path and not have this flexibility, then one, we're going to see a lot of turnover. And then two, we're going to have a hard time recruiting people, because flex work is, for many people in our workforce, in our current workforce, so your millennials and your Gen Zs and your younger Gen Xers, that has become one of the most important benefit, and they're looking for that. And so I think if we don't shift, you're gonna lose team members that maybe you don't want to lose, and you're gonna have a hard time recruiting because it's not part of our benefits.
Great, thank you. The next question is, does UCLA training or the Office of Organizational Development provide a toolkit specifically looking for UCLA approved templates for creating a skill matrix, or is it acceptable to use templates or ideas from other sources like LinkedIn classes? And it seems like media has provided a CHR link, but I wonder if you have any more resources that you can share.
And the skill matrix is, it doesn't have to be anything formal, right? What it's going to take is for someone to, to sit down and say, okay, these are the different roles that we have in the organization, and what roles are we looking for? What skills should a project manager have, or what skills should a training a specialist have, and just list it, right? And there are a lot of resources. I mean, I can go into the Association of Talent and Development, so ATD. You can go atd.org, or even in SHRM, which is the Society for Human Resources. They have templates for doing skill matrices and things like that. So there's tons of resources out there. And I don't think they have to be UCLA approved.
Right.
The skill matrices is just for you to be able to help develop your employees.
Right. And one last question before we end is, how do you deal with imposter syndrome when receiving positive feedback from your supervisors or managers?
No, I was just talking to somebody about this. I think for imposter syndrome is really very internal, right? And it's really up to that individual to kind of look at what they have achieved and take in all that positive feedback that they may be getting, and really saying, why do I feel this way when I'm actually seeing results, right? I'm actually seeing I'm actually getting feedback from others. So what is it that, I'm either afraid of? And most of the time for imposter syndrome, it's really being afraid to fail, right?
Right.
I don't want to put myself out there, because if I don't do it right, then I'm going to get, maybe negative feedback or criticism. And I think we need to kind of adjust that thinking and look at sort of what's happening outside of you. And one of the things that I always kind of tell people is we have a lot of blind spots, but blind spots, the only way you can know blind spots is if you seek feedback from others, because they're kind of seeing maybe what you're not seeing. And so I would really consider seriously what positive feedback you're getting, and use that to alleviate the fears that you may have about failing or not succeeding in whatever effort you put yourself into.
Do you think that there's something to be said about, like, if you're making your expectations clear on both ends, right, with the supervisor and yourself, and you're meeting the expectations and you are receiving the positive feedback, then maybe that could help alleviate some of that imposter syndrome?
No, yeah, absolutely. And I think, if there's, sometimes there are people that really need to be structured, and like what you just said, right? They need feedback from, it's probably good to kind of do like a 360 feedback, right? Because you're getting it, you're going to assess yourself, others are going to assess you, and then you can kind of put the assessment side by side and kind of see what is that. And then additionally, when I tell people when they do 360s is to talk to that person who gave you that feedback that may be different from yours, and then ask them, what is it that I do that made you say that I was a great whatever, like
Right.
great innovator, or I'm a great collaborator? What is it, like behaviorally? have them tell you what it is that you do. And I think that will help reinforce, your own, reinforce yourself so that you don't feel like you're still lacking, because you know exactly what it is that they're seeing.
Thank you, Gerrie. This has been such a great topic to discuss. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you everyone for joining us. That concludes our presentation for today. And next month, we will have an SAO panel and for another career panel. So we hope that you'll join us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gerrie.
Thank you.